So we were discussing about chapter 2, that is consumer behavior in services. The name of the subject is service marketing. The code of the subject is MBAS 557. So we started by discussing the search, experience and credence property that are present in a services. How does it contributes for marketing, or why does it matters when it comes to marketing of services? There were three attributes that we had to discuss, that is search, product or services. We spoke about experience, goods or services. Then we discussed whether work or a search or experience, that is to tell whether the work is a search or whether it is experience goods. Then we spoke about credence goods or services. Then all these dilemmas that are present, we try to discuss all those things in detail. Then we spoke about customer expectations of services. Then we spoke about the different types of expectations, that is desired service and adequate service. Then we spoke about zone of tolerance, where does this actually occurs. Then we spoke about how different customers possess different zone of tolerance. Then we had discussed factors that influence customer expectations of services. There we discussed regarding personal needs, personal service philosophy and derived service expectation. So in our today's class, let us begin by understanding the sources of adequate service expectation. Now, other than those elements we have discussed earlier, there are different set of determinants which affects these adequate services. Now the level of service the customer finds acceptable shall be far different from one another. So if I have to tell in general terms, all these influence that we are speaking, they are short term, and not only that they are short term, they also tend to fluctuate more than the factors that influence the desired services. So here we shall discuss three different factors which influence desired service, that is perceived service alternatives, situational factors and predicted services. All those three that has been highlighted in this particular diagram. That is, the factors or the sources of desired services are personal needs, personal service philosophy and derived service expectations. The factors or the sources of adequate service expectations are perceived service alternatives, situational factors and predicted services. Now there is also this point that the problems that might occur with the initial service, it can also lead to high expectations. So performing a service in a very good way or in the right way for the first time is very, very important for a service provider, because customers always value service reliability above all other dimension of service. So performing a service right for the first time is very important. So if the service fails in the recovery phase, fixing it right the next time, or being reliable in service recovery is shall be even more critical than you would have taken attention in the first time. So we can take an example of automobile repair service provider. So now in this, what happens is, now if a problem exists with the automobile brakes, then you might consult a car repair provider. So when you consult them, you expect the company to fix the brakes. So if at all you experience future problem with the brakes after the repair, then definitely the level of service you consider to be adequate will increase. So in this and on all other different situations where temporary services intensifiers are present, excuse me, the level of adequate service will increase, and also the zone of tolerance will become narrow. Then we have so we shall see the first one, that is perceived service alternatives. Now, what are these perceived service alternatives? See, perceived service alternatives are other providers from whom the customers can or perceive that they can obtain services. So if customers believe they have multiple service providers to choose from, or if they can provide the service for themselves, such as maybe lawn care or personal grooming, then their level of adequate services shall definitely be higher than those of customers who believe it is not possible to get better service elsewhere. That is to tell, if you take an example of airline customer. Now this customer who might be living in a small town, maybe with a tiny airport, they might have reduced set of options in airline travel. So definitely such a customer will be more tolerant of the service performance of the carriers in the town, because few alternatives exist. Now such a customer will accept the limited schedule of flights and lower levels of service more than the customer whom you might have in big city, who has myriad flights and airlines for different options to choose from. So the customer perception that service alternative exists, it shall definitely raise the level of adequate services and also narrows the zone of tolerance. So it is important that service marketers fully understand the complete set of options that customers view as perceived alternatives. So in the small town airport, example that I just gave, the set of alternatives from the customer's point of view is likely to include more than just other airlines. Like maybe rail service or driving service. So in general, service marketers, they should always discover the alternatives that the customers would be able to view as comparable rather than those in the company's competitive set. So that is how it shall work. The second one that has been put up here is situational factors. That is to tell the different level of adequate services that we are speaking. Now it is also influenced by situational factors. Now one thing about situational factors is that it is generally considered to be contemporary in nature. So one of the type of situational factors is, uncontrollable situational factors. Now this is included in, service performance conditions that definitely customers view as beyond the control of service provider. That is to tell, might be any catastrophe that customer view, as beyond the control of service provider. Maybe, we shall take earthquake or tornadoes. It does affect a large number of people at one time, and it may also lower service expectations for insurance customers in other geographical locations, because they recognize that, insurers are inundated with, demands for their services. So during the days, following the maybe some kind of hurricane, there shall definitely be problem with telephone or internet service. Mainly may not be because it has lost connection, but definitely maybe because, there were so many people who were trying to get in touch with friends and relatives. And when this happens, when people know that there is disaster, when people know that is catastrophe, when they expect the service and when they are unable to get the service and they know the reason, under such circumstances, the customers of all such services, if you observe, they will be, quite forgiving during such disasters, because they understand the source of problem. So that is what, customers who can recognize that, situational factors are definitely not the fault of the service company. They may accept lower levels of adequate services given the context. So situational factors, often temporarily lower the level of adequate services, and it also widens the zone of tolerance. And personal situational factors consist of, short-term individual factors that make a customer more aware of the need for services. So personal emergency situation in which, services is urgently needed, such as, maybe an accident and the need for automobile insurance or a breakdown in office equipment during a busy period, it raised the level of adequate service expectations, particularly in terms of, level of responsiveness required, and which is considered to be acceptable. That is to tell, take an example of online company which depends on, network connectivity to receive customer orders. Now such a company will be more demanding of its internet service provider, especially during peak demand periods. So any system breakdown will be tolerated, very much less during these intense periods than at other time when the demand would be lower. So the impact of personal situational factors is very much evident in these things. Then finally we have predicated services. So this is one of the final factor that influences, adequate service is predicated service. Predicted service. So the level of service, that customers anticipate they are likely to get is predicted service. So this type of service expectations, it can be seen as, predictions usually made by customer about what is likely to happen during the impending transaction or exchange. Or they might have seen the product and they might have expected the product would be The product would be so and so, um, and that it would reach them by this particular time. So these predictions, what they do, gives it the name predicted services. So this predicted service performance, now it implies some objective calculation of the probability of performance or estimate of anticipated service performance level. So if customers predict good service, their levels of adequate service are likely to be higher than if they predict poor service. That is to take an example of full-time residents in a college town. Usually, they predict faster student service during the summer months when students are not on campus. So this prediction will probably lead them to have higher standards of adequate service in restaurants during the summer than during school months. On the other hand, customers of cable service providers and utilities in a college town, they know that installation service from these firms will be difficult to obtain during the first few weeks of school when students are setting up their apartments for the year. So in this case, the level of adequate service decreases and also the zone of tolerance widens. So predicted service, it is typically an estimate or a calculation of the services that a customer will receive in an individual transaction rather than in the overall relationship with the service provider. Whereas desired and adequate service expectations, they are nothing but the global assessments comprising many individual service transactions. So predicted service is almost always an estimate of what will happen in the next service encounter or transaction that customer experience for this reason. So predicted service is viewed here particularly as an influence of adequate services. So now we shall see some of the sources of both the desired and predicted services. So we had seen what are the factors which influence desired service. The factors which influence desired services are personal needs, personal service philosophy, and derived service expectation. Now, the factors which influence adequate services are perceived service alternatives, situational factors, and predicted services. Now, let us see all those factors which influence both desired and predicted services. So now the factors which influence both desired and predicted services are, as you can see in the slide, it is explicit service promises, you have implicit service promises, you have word of mouth communication, you have past experience. See, there is a difference. We are not speaking about desired services and adequate services. We are speaking about all the factors which are influencing desired service and predicted service, as you can see in the slide. Now, here what I want to tell is that normally when consumers they are interested in purchasing service, normally what do? They are likely to seek or take information from several different sources. Now, if we have to give an example, they might call a store and ask, or they can ask a friend, or they may deliberately see in any kind of advertisement, or nowadays you do definitely have internet services that are necessary to find all the things that you need. And it also does provide services at lowest price. So the customers, they may also receive service information by watching television, or when they surf the net, or they might hear it through an unsolicited comment from a colleague about a service that was performed well. Now, in addition to these active and passive types of external search for information, consumers may conduct an internal search by, reviewing the information held in memory about the services. So, we shall now see the four factors that influence both desired service and predicted service expectation. So, first one is explicit service promises. So, these explicit service promises that we are speaking, they are personal and also non-personal statement about the service made by an organization to their customer. I'll repeat it once again. These explicit service promises are personal and non-personal statement about the service made by the organization to the customer. So the statement are personal when they are communicated by the firm's salesperson or the service personnel, and they are non-personal when they come from the company's maybe website or web page or advertising, brochures and other written publication. So these web pages, they depicted above displays the promises made on the internet by maybe the company. So here, the explicit services promises are one of the few influences on expectations that are completely within the control of service provider. So, promising exactly what will ultimately be delivered would seem a logical and appropriate way to manage customer expectation and ensure that reality fits the promises. But then, however, companies and the personnel who represent them often deliberately, they overpromise to obtain business or inadvertently overpromise by stating their best estimates about delivery of a service in the future. Now, in addition to this overpromising that we are speaking, what company representatives do is that they simply do not always know the appropriate promise to make, because the main thing about services is that these services, they are often customized, and definitely it makes this particular characteristic of services of customization not easy to define and repeat it. So the representative in the organization, they may not know when or in what final form the services will be delivered. So all the types of the explicit services promises, it shall definitely have direct effect on the desired service expectation. That is to tell, now we considered a firm's website. Now if at all this website, it promises to design an ideal home theater experience for a customer, then perform audio and video setup and connect all of the customer's various components and home network, the customer's desire for that services and as well as the service of competitors will be shaped by this promise. So a hotel customer describes the impact of explicit promise on expectation. I have taken a quote from this particular customer. He tells that they get you real pumped with a beautiful ad. When you go in, you expect the bells and whistles to go off. Usually, they do not. So, a business equipment repair customer tells, when you buy a piece of equipment, you expect to get a competitive advantage from it. So, service is promised within the sale of the equipment. So, these are, particular dangerous promises that many companies today make to their business customers is to provide, a total solution to their business needs. So this promise, it is usually are those which are very much difficult to deliver. So explicit service promises, it influence the level of both desired services and predicted services. Now they shape what customers desire in general as well as that they predict will happen in the next service encounter from a particular service provider or in a certain service encounter. So that was the first one. Then we have implicit service promises. Now, these promises or implicit service promises, they are what we can call as service related cues other than explicit promises that lead to influence about what the service should and will be like. So these quality cues, they are dominant by price and the tangible associated with the service. So in general, the higher the price and the more impressive the tangibles, the more a customer will expect from the service. For that matter, consider a customer who shops for insurance. He finds two firms charging radically different price. So this customer may infer that the firm with the higher price should and will provide higher quality service and better coverage. So that is what normally happens. And similarly, if we take a customer who stays at a posh hotel, with luxurious lobby, this customer is likely to desire and predict a higher standard of service than from a hotel with less impressive facilities. Then we have word of mouth communication. Now, this is something which has very much importance, and the importance of word of mouth communication, in shaping the expectations of service, is always well documented. Now, these statements, usually which is made by parties, normally other than the organization, such as those found on maybe in social networking websites, they convey to customers what the services will be like, and it definitely influences both predicted and also the desired services. Now this word of mouth communication, it carries particular weight as an information source because it is perceived as unbiased. Now word of mouth communication, it tends to be very important in service that are difficult for customers to evaluate before purchase and before having direct experience of them. Now, when we speak of this experts, it might include consumer reports, it might include friends and family. And when we speak about social media, it can be such as Facebook, Twitter, All these are also word of mouth source that can affect the level of desired and predicted services. And the last one that we have to speak about is past experience. Definitely, past experience also influenced both the desired and predicted services. Past experience is nothing but the customer's previous exposure to service that is relevant to the focal service. For example, normally you also being a customer, you probably compare each stay in a particular hotel with all previous stays that you have made in that hotel. Sorry. But then the past experience with a focal hotel is likely to be very limited view of your past experience. You may also compare each stay with your experience in other hotels and hotel chains. So customers also compare across industries. Hospital patients, for example, they compare hospital stays against the standard of hotel visits. Now, if at all there are cable customers, now these customers tend to compare cable services with the standards set by telephone service. Now, one reason cable service is often judged to be poor. Now, past experience, they may incorporate, previous experiences with the focal service provider. So, this typical performance of similar service offerings and experience with the last service purchase shall definitely be there. So the different source vary in terms of all these factors that we spoke. Now all this vary in terms of their credibility as well as their potential to be influenced by the marketer. So the strategy inside shows the breakdown of various factors and how service marketers can influence them. So this is all about factors which influence desired and predicted service. The same what has been put up in the slide has been put up in the last slide has been put up here word by word. So next we shall see the issues involving customers' service expectation. So whatever you can see over the slide, that over the 5 different points. Now these are the issues or it represent topics of particular interest to service marketers concerning the customer expectation. So we shall see each one of it. The first one is, what does a service marketer do if customer expectations are unrealistic? So one of the inhibitor or one of the main reason to learn about customer expectations is management's and employees' fear of asking. So this particular thing it often stems from the belief that customer expectations will be extravagant and unrealistic, and that by asking above them, a company will set up itself for even loftier expectation level. That is to tell, unrealistic. Unrealistic and loftier are one and the same. So the customer's main expectation of services are quite simple and basic. That is to tell, simply put, customer expect services companies to do what they are supposed to do. Now they expect fundamentals, not fancies, performance, and not empty performances. So customers, they want services to be delivered to. Now customers main wait a second, I'll come back. Okay. Now we were speaking about the unrealistic expectation. Now this is what the service provider thinks, that instead of asking the customer and making ourselves or putting ourselves in a difficult situation, we just need to provide them services. Normally, what customers does is that they do not fancy, but they do expect a better service. But then, on the other hand, we do also have this, that a very simple way to learn if customers' expectations are realistic is to ask them. So, asking customers about their expectation, it does not, so much raise the levels of the expectation themselves, but rather it heightens the belief that the company will do something with the information that surfaces. So arguably, the worst thing a company can do is show a strong interest in understanding what customers expect and then never act to the information. So at a minimum, a company should acknowledge to customers that it has received and heard their input, and that it will expend effort trying to address their issues. So the company may not be able to uh, and indeed it does not always have to deliver to all those expressed expectations of it. So, and there is an alternative and appropriate response would be to let customers know the reason that desired services is not being provided at the present time, or describe the efforts planned to deliver such services in the future. So another approach could be to educate customers about ways to use and improve the service they currently receive. So, giving customer progress updates as services improve to address their needs and desire is sensible, because it allows the company to get credit for incremental efforts to improve their service. The second issue that arises is with the question: should a company try to delight the customer? Whether that is possible, no matter how much effort organization puts, is it really possible to delight the customer, or Asking the question, should a company try to delight the customer, makes up the second issue. Now, this issue has arisen because some management consultants they urge service companies to what we call as delight customers, so that by delighting the customers they are able to gain a competitive edge. Now, the delight they refer to is a profoundly, positive emotional state that results from having, one's expectations exceeded to a surprising degree. Now, one of the author that I had gone through, that particular person describes, the type of services that results in delight as, I quote, positively outrageous service. So, what does this positively outrageous service means? Now, it means that it represents all those services which are unexpected, random, extraordinary, and disproportionately positive. So a way that managers can conceive of delight as depicted in the above example is always to consider product and service future in terms of concentric rings as what we can tell. Now, within the core, or what we can call as bullseye, whenever such a consideration is taken, it refers to all those attributes that are taken to delight customer, or all those attributes that are central to the the basic function of the products or services, or what we can call as the must haves of a company. So their provision is no, it is not particularly noticeable, but then all such attributes, if at all they are absent, then definitely can be made out. So around the must have ring, what we call, around this what lies is called as satisfiers. Now, all these satisfiers, they are features that have the potential to further satisfy beyond the basic function of the product. So, and in the final and outer level, there shall be delights or product features that are unexpected and surprisingly enjoyable. So these features are things that consumers would not expect to find and are therefore highly surprised and sometimes excited when they receive them. For consideration, take an example of your class. Now, in your class, the must consists of maybe your lecturers, the room that you will have to sit in, the syllabus that you will have to study, and also all the class meetings. And the next comes the outer ring, what we call as satisfiers. Now these satisfiers, it might include interesting course lectures, maybe professors who are entertaining, or some professors who make the subject interesting or friendly, and all those technologies that are used to give good audio visual aids, which are provided in your classrooms. And the outermost ring, you will be having delights. Now this delights might include a free textbook for students who might sign up for the courses, or punch and cookies provided maybe for on the first day of the class, or maybe when you have exams, and all such things. So, delighting customer, it might seem like a good idea, and it can lead to repeat purchasing and customer loyalty. But this level of service provision, it always comes with extra effort, and also it acts as a cost to the firm. So, delighting customer does not build their loyalty. So what has more influence is providing services that requires customers to put in minimal effort to get satisfactory solutions to their service issues. Therefore, the benefits of providing delight must always be considered as to how much cost it is going to incur for the organization. So, among the considerations, we also have the staying power and competitive implication of delight. So, the staying power, it involves the question of how long a company can expect an experience of delight to maintain the consumer's attention. Now, if it is fleeting and the customer forgets it immediately, it may not be worth the cost. And alternatively, if the customer, if this person remembers uh, the delight and the adjustment, their level of expectations definitely upward, it shall be upward. So it will cost the company more just to satisfy. So effectively raising the bar for the future. So research indicates that delighting customer does in fact raise expectations and make it more difficult for a company to satisfy the customers in the future. Now, the competitive implication of delight, it relates to its impact on expectations of other firms in the same industry. That is, if a customer in the same industry is unable to copy the delight strategy, it will be disadvantaged by the consumer's increased expectations. That is to tell, if at all you were offered that free textbook in one of your classes, you might then expect to receive one in each of your classes. So those classes not offering the free textbook might not have high enrollment levels compared to the delighting class. So if a competitor can easily copy the delight strategy, however neither firm benefits. But then remember one thing, the consumer shall definitely benefit from such actions that are taken by competitors. And all the firms, they may be hurt because their costs increase and profits erode. So the implication is that if companies choose to delight, they should do so in areas that cannot be copied by other firms. So then arises the third question, where we can tell how does a company exceeds customer service expectations? This is to tell that there are many companies which talk about exceeding customer expectations or delighting and surprising their customers by you know giving more than they expect. We can take example one of the resort. This resort is called as Pebble Beach, and this particular resort, it is located along the Pacific for coast of North California. So this Gulf resort, no, they not only talk about exceeding customer expectation, but it actually prints the following phrase on the back side of the employee business card. They tell that, I quote, exceed the expectations of every guest by providing a once in a lifetime experience every time. Now, this particular philosophy that the Pebble Beach has. Now, this particular philosophy, it always raises the question, should a service provider try simply to meet customer expectation, or whether they should always exceed them? So first, no, it is essential to recognize that exceeding customer expectation of the basics is virtually impossible. So honoring promises, having the reserved room available, or meeting deadlines, or showing up for meetings, or maybe delivering the core service is what the company is supposed to do. So, companies are supposed to be accurate and dependable and provide the service they promise to provide. And ask yourself if a providers doing any of these things would delight you. Excuse me. But the conclusion you should reach is that it is very difficult to surprise or delight customers consistently by delivering reliable services. So, when this is the case, then the next question arises. Then, how a company delights its customers and exceed their expectation? So, in virtually any service, developing a customer relationship is one approach for exceeding service expectation. We have the United Service Automobile Association, who is called as USAA. Now, they are a provider of insurance, especially to military personnel and their dependents. Now, this particular company, it illustrates how a large company that seldom has face-to-face interaction with its customer can surprise and delight them with a personalization of service and knowledge of the customer. Now, this company, they have a state of the art imaging system. That is, all USAA employees, they can access any customer's entire information file in seconds, giving them full knowledge of the customer history and requirements and the status of the customers recent interactions with the company. And this will expect a lower level of personalization from an insurance company. And from most any service interaction on the telephone, USAA's customers are surprised and impressed with the care and concern that the employees demonstrate. So, there are other companies also who use a similar type of information technology. Like there is Ritz Carlton hotels, or two-time recipient of the this particular company. They have received uh, Malcolm Bridge Quality Award twice. So they provide highly personalized attention to its customer. So the companies train each of its employees to note guests likes and dislikes and to record these into a computerized guest history profile. So the company has information on the preferences of several hundred thousand repeat Ritz Scotland guests, which results in more personalized service. The aim is not simply to meet expectations of guests, but to provide them with a memorable visit. So the company uses the guest history information to exceed customer expectations of the way they will be treated. So when a repeat customer calls the hotel central reservation number to book accommodation, the reservation agent can call up the individual preference information. So the agent then sends this information electronically to particular hotel at which the reservation is made. The hotel puts the data in daily guest recognition and preference report circulated to employees. So employees then greet the repeat guest personally and check in and ensure that the guest needs or preferences are anticipated and met. But then, having given this example in the academics, they do also have the question then, if this is the case, then how can one think that how well this particular approach work? Uh, for this question, there is one of the professor called as J.T. Power. uh, and they tell that it is sorry, this particular researcher, he tells that it is quite well that such approaches work because they have done this research in Ritz Carlton, and this particular luxury hotel, it was top rated in terms of customer satisfaction 7 times between 2007 and 2015. That is really, out of 8 years, 7 years they have received a top rated, they have received the status of top rated hotel. And along the way, another way to exceed expectations is to deliberately under promise the services so that it will be able to increase the likelihood of exceeding customer expectation. So the strategy is to under promise and over deliver. So if every service promise is less than what will eventually happen, customers can be delighted frequently. But then, although this reasoning sounds logical, a firm should weigh two potential problems before using this strategy. The first is that customers with whom a company interacts regularly are likely to notice the under promising and adjust their expectations accordingly by negating the desired benefit of delight. So customers will recognize the pattern of under promising when time after time a firm promises on delivery time, that is, we cannot get that to you before 5 p.m. tomorrow, or yet constantly exceeding it by delivering at noon. Or secondly, under promising in a sales situation, it might potentially reduce the competitive appeal of the offering, and it must be tempered by what the competition is offering. That is, when competitive pressures are high, presenting a cohesive and honest portrayal of the service, which might be, both explicitly, maybe through advertising and personal selling, and implicitly, that is, such as through the appearance of service facilities and the price of services, it may be wiser. So, controlling the firm's promises, making them consistent with the delivered service, may be a better approach. And finally, to exceed expectation, without raising them in the future, is to position, unusual service as unique rather than the standard. We can take example of one of the flight company. This particular company, it has a flight between Rake, German, and Charlotte, and North Caroline. One of the customer experienced an example of this particular strategy. So this flight is extremely short. This flight is less than half an hour, and typically, too brief for beverage service. So on that flight, however, a crew member announced over the intercom that an unusually ambitious crew wanted to try serve beverages anyway. He warned passengers that the crew may not get to all of us, and positioned the service as unique by imploring passengers not to expect beverage service on other flights. So, in this scenario, passengers seemed delighted, but their expectations for regular service were not heightened by the action. So, after this question, we have the next issue, that is, do customer service expectations continuously escalate? So, as we illustrated, earlier, customer service expectations are dynamic in both the credit card or maybe in the mobile telephone industry. So, as in many competitive service industries, where they battle, where the companies battle, thereby seek to best each other and thereby raise the level of service above that of competing companies. So service expectations in this case adequate, and service expectation rise as quickly as service delivery or promise rise. So, in a highly competitive and rapidly changing industry, expectations can thus rise quickly. And for this reason, companies need to monitor adequate service expectations continually. So, the more turbulent the industry, the more frequent is the monitoring needed. Desired service expectations, on the other hand, are far more stable because they are always driven by more enduring factors such as maybe personal needs or personal service philosophy. They tend to high to begin with, and also they tend to remain high. And finally, we have the question, how does a service company stay ahead of competition, especially in meeting customer expectations? So, now, having discussed so many things, all the things being equal, a company's goal is to meet customer expectation better than its competitors. And given the fact that adequate service expectations, it changes rapidly in a turbulent environment. Now the question is, how can a company ensure that it stays ahead of competition? So the adequate service level reflects the minimum performance levels expected by customers after they consider a variety of personal and external factors, maybe including the availability of service options from other providers. Companies whose service performance falls short of this level are clearly at a competitive advantage, so with the disadvantage escalating as the gap also widens. So these companies customers may be reluctant customers, who might be you know who are ready to take their business elsewhere the moment they perceive an acceptable alternative exit. So if they are to use service quality for competitive advantage, companies must perform above the adequate service level. So this level, however, it may signal only a temporary advantage. So the customer's adequate service levels, which are less stable than desired service levels, will definitely rise rapidly when competitors promise and deliver a high level of service. If a company's level of service is barely above the adequate service level to begin with, so a competitor can quickly erode that advantage to develop a true customer or franchise immutable customer loyalty companies. They must not only consistently exceed the adequate service level but also reach the desired service level. So, expectational service can intensify customers' loyalty to a point at which they are impervious to competitive options. So, firms they might also consider how they present their promises to customer, which are relative to the competition. So now here first is the salesperson who knows that no competitor can meet an inflated sales promise in an industry. So this particular person he would be able to point that fact out, point out the fact that customer, and thereby refuting the promise made by competitive salespeople. And if that is not possible, then the company will have second option is for the provider to follow a sale with a reality check about service delivery. So these are quite a few things that can be answered. Um, when it comes to expectation, what we can tell is that all these expectations that are there when a service is provided. Now, how it is illustrated by service providers' behavior shall be different, and what it means to the customer shall definitely be different. That is to tell, let us try to take quite a few examples so that it would be able to understand in a better way. Now, if at all the company speaks about competency, whenever a company tells competency, now when the customer hears this particular word, they normally think it in terms of, maybe I want everything handled correctly the first time. The customer might think that, I expect them to know how this actually works. So, but when they tell competence, and if at all it is, illustrate, how does illustrative service provider behaves? Now, if at all competence and we take appliance repairman, this particular person, he has to fix the broken refrigerator correctly so that it does not break down again within a week. Or if we take down a travel agent, this travel agent must be, very well to inform the traveler of the visa requirement for the country that his customer wants to visit. The next attribute we can take is with the explanation. With explanation, explanation would be, I want to know what is happening. uh, or the customer might be like, I want to know how this works. And illustrative service provider behavior might be like, airline counter agent who provide passengers, frequent updates on the delayed flight status. Or you have insurance agent, clearly explaining the policy and answers all questions the customers has about what is and what is not covered. When the customer might hear respect, it might mean to customer as I want to feel like a valued customer. When I ask some person, I really want the provider to answer me very well. Now, taking it this into consideration from the point of view of a service provider's behavior, and if at all we take this aspect of respect in hotel desk manager, then the hotel desk manager has to listen to the guest concerns about, his room, and act accordingly to what is possible to make it right. And if at all we take it in healthcare clinic, receptionist, they normally verbally, they it is expected that they should verbally greet each patient, and they should be able to make eye contact upon entrance into the clinic. Then one more attribute we have is hygiene. So when the service is something related to hygiene, a customer would normally prefer that, the customer expects the facility to be clean, the customer expects the facilities to be well kept. And not only that, if at all the service provider is going to a customer's house and working, then the customers will expect their home to be kept clean even when they work. And while illustrative service provider behavior, if we speak in terms of restaurant manager, this particular person, he normally walks through the dining area every 15 minutes, and he would ask to sweep the floor as needed. If at all it is a plumber, they normally wear protective shoe coverings while walking through maybe the customer's house. The next aspect that we have is with regard to flexibility. When we speak about flexibility, normally the customers would, like them to be able to accommodate their situation or understand and customize the service. The customers, they expect them to be able to bend the rules a little, maybe if it is necessary. That is to tell, let us take an example with flexibility and service provider. Now if at all it is a golf instructor, or for that matter any instructor of any game, they should provide concurrent lessons for the customers, and also maybe for their daughter, their children sometime. And we can also take the example of credit card service representative. They normally examine the customer's payment history, and waive the late payment fee if at all it is not a regular occurrence. That can be possibly done. Then the next attribute might be like urgency. Whenever there is urgency, normally it means to the customer that their situation has to be taken seriously, and that their situation has to be addressed as quickly as possible. For example, urgency, and we can take the example of tax accountant. So this tax accountant, it is expected that they respond within maybe some hours to any inquiries from their existing customers, or within one business day to a potentially new customer. So then we have consistency. When we tell about, or when we speak about consistency, normally the customer, they expect to receive the same level of service each time that they ask for. Maybe the best examples are maybe dry cleaners or the oil change technician. When it is dry cleaners, they provide the same level of cleanliness, and crease the materials in the same spot each and every time. If it is a oil change technician, they check and two of all six fluids for the customer automobile on every visit that is possible. Then we have hassle free. Whenever it is hassle free, the customer expects that the process to be simple and easy to them. We can take an example of lawn care technician. This lawn care technician, they arrive each quarter without being prompted, and provide an automatic payment option once the service is completed. You have computer remote support agent who complete laptop computer tune up and install needed software updates without requiring any additional input from the customer. Then we have promptness. Whenever there is promptness, the customer expect that they would want to wait a long time to be served. I mean, they do not want to, sorry, they do not want to wait a long time to be served, or they expect to receive help as quickly as possible. Maybe when it comes for a post office clerk or a financial advisor, normally when it is post office clerk, they request assistance or additional help from the staff, maybe who are there in the back room when the line of customer grows to maybe more than 10-15 people. And then we have financial advisors. These people normally respond to all telephone calls within maybe 2 hours, and emails within 4 hours maybe. Then we have competency. When we speak about competency, it is like I want some assurance they know what they are doing. Maybe in case of auto service repairman or a tailor, they explain that what was done to the vehicle and demonstrate what was faulty with the old parts. And if it is tailor, they explain the process involved in resizing and altering the dress while the customer is present in the store. Then we have fairness in question. When it comes to fairness, normally the customer expect to receive the same treatment that any other customer would receive. And when it comes to empathy, maybe the customers they want to put themselves in their shoes, and they expect them to be able to see things from the customer's perspective. Now, all these expectations that we spoke about, maybe competency, explanation, respect, hygiene, flexibility, urgency, consistency, hassle free, promptness, competency, fairness, and empathy. All these things, it was adapted from a book called as Understanding Customer Expectation of Service, which was written by A. Parashuraman, L. L. Berry, and V. S. Zetimal. So this was taken from their particular book. So having said so much, I guess this is where would we stop for this particular day. So before we stop for the day, I want take down your attendance.